Hello, welcome to this video. My name is Alejandro Potter, and today I'm going to be giving a commentary outlining the general process that I used for creating this Symmetro highlight intro that you might have seen on some social media platform or another that I've posted it on. So, real quick background, I am a gameplay animator currently working at Frontier Developments, and yeah, I essentially was doing this animation for a monthly contest that Frame by Frame has on their Facebook group. So if you're not part of that group, there's a link down below, and this rig was graciously provided for this contest courtesy of Tim Oliver Hogg, I hope I said his last name right, and Keel Figgins. So let's just jump right into it. First things first, I want you guys to understand that when I was making this animation, the timing for it actually was really perfect because I really did want to create a highlight intro for my latest demo reel already. And it was kind of crazy because as soon as I thought about doing that, they put out this contest, and I figured, you know what the hell, why not? Let me give it my best shot, see what I can do. And I mean, I think it turned out okay. I really enjoyed doing it, and yeah. So as I'm watching this sped up version of the process, this is well over 10 hours of work. I think it was maybe like 12 hours that I spent on this or something like that. But I was only able to get 10 hours worth of footage because either my recording didn't work the way that I needed it to, or I just straight up like left the computer for a minute, so I stopped recording and then I came back and I started recording again. But it's safe to say that this 5-second intro animation took, give or take, like 11 to 12 hours of solid animation work. And sorry that it isn't in 720, that it's in 720p quality. I just figured out how to make it super HD. So the thing is, I've actually cut out quite a bit of this because I spent a lot of my time in the beginning stages just trying to figure out the rig. This was a completely new rig for me, and I'd never touched it before. I had no idea what I was doing, and so I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out where all the controls were, how it really worked, what kind of settings I could have. And I'll get into this later, but there were some things halfway through where I was like, damn, like I wish I saw this control earlier. So I think the biggest thing that I want to say is that if you have a new rig, just spend a lot of time trying to get to know it as much as you possibly can, because it's going to save you so much more time. Like, I guarantee that next time I do an animation with this guy, it's going to take a lot less time than it did for this. And yeah, I really wanted to aim for doing an animation that was simple but satisfying. That was the key that I wanted to aim for by the end of this contest, or by the end of this animation. I really wanted to make sure that whatever I did, because I was doing this in between work and in between, daily life, I wanted to make sure that it was, it wasn't too crazy because I had to finish it before the month was over. So I had to make sure that whatever I did would be simple and satisfying. And I wanted to make sure that the animation I did also showed a lot of character and was flashy enough, but not so flashy that I'd have to spend so much time polishing it that I wouldn't be able to get it done in time. So I really did want to up the entertainment value of it by adding in some really neat camera work. And I also wanted to make sure that it mimicked what you would see in an actual Overwatch game. So I studied a lot of the Blizzard animations that they had for their highlight intros in the Overwatch game. I looked at kind of how their characters were animated, what kind of things they exaggerated, and it looked like that they weren't afraid to, use smear frames, and you'll see some of that later on, I believe. But it also looked like they weren't afraid to exaggerate and to even break the character's pose in the right places if they had to. Because remember, the number one thing with animation in general is that at the end of the day, you want it to be as appealing as possible. Like, every bone in my body was telling me that his fingers should not be bending this way, but when you watch it in motion, it feels nice. You know what I mean? So I really wanted to make sure that no matter what, when you watched it, you felt good when you were watching it. So yeah, simple yet satisfying. So I ended up looking up a lot of the Overwatch animations, and for my other references, I was looking at tutting videos. Like, tutting is I guess, a form of dancing where you use your hands and your fingers to show a lot of movement. And since this guy is based off of Symmetro, who does a similar type of deal, I wanted to see if I could get him doing some really cool and unique tutting motions, something similar to Symmetro, but not something that you've seen before. And so yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to get the hand poses correct, a lot of time on the fingers. I animated in stepped mode as well at first, and I can tell you right now that this animation is a perfect example of what can happen if you use the 80-20 rule. So what is the 80-20 rule? The 80-20 rule is that 80% of your success will come from 20% of your efforts, and 20% of your results will come from like 80% of your results will come from 20% of the things that you do, something like that, right? So in regards to this, I spent basically 80% of my time just getting the posing right. Like, out of the 13 hours that I spent on this animation, I'll tell you right now that I spent most of it in stepped mode, and just kind of getting the timing and the posing as tight as possible. So a lot of this video is literally just me trying to figure out which poses I wanted to keep, how I was going to get those breakdowns in. And I started off with just 2 poses that I thought would work. And what's funny is by the end of this entire thing, the only pose that remained consistent from beginning to end was the last pose. That last pose, I knew I wanted that immediately. I also knew that I wanted him to start off with his hands closed and bringing them down into the action. And I also knew that the camera would play a really vital role in this performance, so I had to also make sure that it arced correctly and followed him in the ways that I wanted it to, and emphasized each and every motion that he had with his hands and fingers. And I also wanted to make it so the the little geometry that he's molding in his hands would work well too. So I'll get into that in the very last stage, but I knew that the most important thing would be getting really strong posing for each beat of this animation. And yeah, the posing was like 80% of this thing. And I think that kind of goes for any animation in general, but I really spent a lot of time just trying to push it as much as humanly possible and making it believable. I also made sure that I didn't bother with the fabric and the clothing too much during the beginning stages. Like, I didn't touch the fabric until the last stage because I wanted to make sure that his body was on point, like a bodybuilder, you feel me? All right. So, yeah. I'm trying to think about if there's any other things that really helped me along the way. I got a lot of feedback as I was going through it, and I watched it over and over and over in stepped mode, and I didn't really refine the camera until maybe the last few hours of this animation when I was in the polish / spline phase of it. So as you can see here, I'm just trying to get his finger poses ready. I'm trying to make sure that you can feel the flow of his hands. And initially I was just going to keep his hands flat because in my reference videos, I'll link them down below, but in my reference videos, sometimes in the tutting dances, they keep their hands completely flat. Their fingers don't move at all as they're kind of like flowing them about from their elbows to their palms. But I wanted to make sure that I kind of did the opposite because I didn't want to make the mistake of following my reference too much, because the animation that Blizzard uses is very cartoony in nature, but it's also realistic at the same time. It's like it's like realism. It's like real cartoony, I guess. Real cartoony. That's the only way I could describe it. It's like a cartoony type of animation with believable, realistic characters. And yeah, I wanted to make sure that no matter what, I didn't get too married to my reference. So I look at it for the general motion that I wanted to achieve, but I would not get married to, the actuality of it, because, the whole point of being an animator is to make reality better. You have to make it feel more alive than it actually is. So that's also, I guess, a warning that I'd give to anybody that's, in animation is please do not follow your reference too closely, because I guarantee the animation will not come out as strong as you want it to be. And yeah, I spent a lot of time also just going. I kind of divide my animations into sections, right? So for me, the first section was him dropping his hands to his chest and then doing the first kind of tutting motion and opening his eyes. That was the first section. The second section was him turning around, and the final section was him getting into that final pose. So when I got my posing down and was starting to get out of the spline, or starting to get out of the stepped mode, I again went to refine my posing, and I also adjusted my timing a bit so it felt more snappy, because at first it was kind of like too floaty. Like, when animations are floaty, when you kind of go from one pose to the next and there's no like clean, crisp breakdowns and pauses and holds on your posing. So I really had to make sure that I did that in the spline pass as I was doing this. And so yeah, I typically will divide my animation into sections where I'll focus on one part and then do the next part and then do the next part after that. So I knew that the hardest part of this animation would be getting those hands and those fingers to feel right. So I spent a lot of time on those. The rest of it was kind of straightforward to me because, once you've done, I guess, like melees, and once you've done like real like movement heavy animations, because that's almost exclusively what you do when you're doing gameplay animations, right? You're doing locomotion, you're doing jumps, you're doing punches, you're doing deaths. Once you kind of get used to that kind of workflow, it gets a lot easier. But the one thing I was not used to was animating hands in this fashion. But I thought that it would be a really good exercise for me in getting used to animating hands and showing how they can express motion and attitude. And I really wanted to give this guy like a confident, almost cocky kind of attitude, kind of like me. You feel me? All right, let me stop. Nah, and I really wanted to make sure that I made him feel like he knew what he was doing, So yeah, in the beginning of the animation, he's kind of like in this like flow state, and you're like, oh, serene, cool. But then when he opens his eyes, he's like, ha, you ready for this? All right, I'm done. And then he, gets into his awesome pose as he's getting ready to fight the bad guys or whatever. But, oh yeah, also one thing that I also did was I changed his helmet thing. Like, I know that technically in the game, the helmet isn't supposed to be looking like that. Like I don't know what you call them, the little side things on his helmet. They're supposed to be sticking up, but I decided to change it because I wanted there to be a big difference from the first and the last pose. And that was also a thing that I wanted to keep in mind as well, was when basically I wanted to make sure that the first and the last frame were I wanted to make sure that the first and the last frame of this animation were very distinct, and you knew when you were in one place and into another. I hope that makes sense. And yeah, here's where I start getting into the fingers. And this, man, yeah, the fingers, I actually had fun animating the fingers, but this is what I was talking about earlier, right? So remember how I said that you need to get used to your rig and you need to understand it more than you understand yourself? Because I could have saved myself so much time with this animation if I just looked closer at the controls, because I was using I was using a different way to animate the fingers than I'm used to. I'm used to the controls being directly on the fingers, right? But this rig gives you the option of having direct finger controls, like direct FK finger controls, and having like straight up the finger controls being divided into channels, as you see here. So I'm using the channels to animate the fingers, and I'm not directly doing it on, you know, their FK, which wasn't turned on. I found out that I could do it after the stepped part of my animation, and I was like, maybe I should start over the fingers. But then I thought, you know what? Screw it. I like making things hard for myself. Why not just animate it this way? I mean, I've already done it this far. Let's see if I can do it. And I will never do it again, but I think I pulled it off. And as you can see, I bend his fingers in a really weird way on one of the frames. That was completely on purpose, I promise. I think it just made it look more flowy, you know, like that was one of those parts where I took creative liberties and making it feel more exaggerated, because nobody's fingers would ever do that. You know, nobody's fingers would ever just kind of bend backwards and bend to the side like this. But, you know, I really wanted to show that motion. And since he was doing it so fast, I felt like I could get away with it in a kind of smear-like fashion. By the way, while I was doing this, I was watching hella movies. Like, I was watching, I think, Back to the Future. You know, I watched Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. I watched all 3 new Planet of the Apes movies as I was doing this. Let me see, what else was I watching? I forgot what else I was watching, but when I'm animating, I either listen to podcasts or watch movies. Well, and I use the term watch very loosely, like watch as in I like put it on my next monitor and kind of listen to it. And when there's a really interesting part, I'll look at it, because I feel like it's important to not get bored when you animate, because then you just won't want to do it. And so I'm like, you know what? I want to watch a movie today. And so I'll be like, you know what? I'll watch it while I animate. Why not that? And this is probably why I'm pretty slow at this right now, because I know that every time I literally sit there in silence, I get, I think, a lot more done. But I also wanted to have fun with it too. Like, last thing you want on a project like this is to get antsy and miserable. So I just decided to take my sweet time. I almost gave up on it, I won't lie. Like, there was a point in this animation when it was like in stepped, and I was like, this looks ugly. I hate it. I'm gonna start over. It's whack. I hate this. But then, you know, I pushed through it, and I was like, and with each hour that passed as I pushed through it, and with each pose that I really liked, I was like, you know what? Maybe that's not so bad. And then I kept going, and yeah, it turned out exactly how I wanted it to. Also, here, oh man, strobing, oh my goodness. Sorry for anybody that has epilepsy in here, because this is really fast right now, but I switch views a lot. I was fighting with my game animator self, because in game, you have to make sure that it looks good from all angles. But I also know that when it comes to having cinematic kind of work like this, you have to make sure it looks good in the camera, period. So there are spots where it looks kind of ugly in this animation, but I made sure that in camera that, you know, ruled above all, because that would be the only way that you would see it, period. So camera is king. What can I say? Also, if you didn't notice, there was a point in this where Maya straight up crashed on me, but I save incrementally, thank goodness, and I also have autosave on, because Maya crashed on me at least 3 times while I was doing this animation. I didn't actually pay that much attention to the face until I was in the polish portion of my animation. So that was like the last step for me, as well as doing the clothing, which I'm doing right here. So as you can see, oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention that leg. If you look frame by frame at that leg, it bends in a horribly unnatural way. But like I said, you know, sometimes you just gotta take a little creative liberty with these kind of things. So yeah, I'm going through adding the flowing of the clothes, the overlapping action here. Yeah, you feel it. Because I actually almost forgot to animate the clothes. I almost forgot to animate the clothes. But one thing I straight up forgot about was the little thing on his head. And I'm pretty sure I didn't even get to record that part because I really did that last minute. The little flap thing on the back of his helmet, I forgot about that completely. But yeah, in the very last stages, I was animating that little crystal light thingy that he has, and then I animated the back of his helmet thing. And that is the animation.